The story begins in the city of Florence during the year 1476. The air is warm and smells of stone and the nearby river. A young man named Ezio Auditore lives a life of ease as the son of a wealthy banker. He spends his days in light-hearted brawls with rival families and his nights climbing the red-tiled roofs of the city to visit his friends. He is handsome, fast, and has no idea that his life is about to change forever. The city is full of art and new ideas, but beneath the surface, there are old grudges and secret plans moving in the dark. Ezio returns home one evening to find the house in a state of mess. His father, Giovanni, and his two brothers have been arrested by city guards. They are accused of treason against the city of Florence. Ezio is confused and scared, but he manages to speak to his father through the bars of a high prison cell in the clock tower. His father tells him to find a hidden chest in his office. Inside the chest, Ezio finds a set of white robes, a broken metal blade, and a collection of papers that prove his father is innocent. He puts on the clothes, feeling the strange weight of the fabric and the cold metal on his wrist. He takes the evidence to a family friend named Uberto Alberti, who is a high-ranking judge. Uberto promises to use the papers to free Ezio's family the next morning. However, when Ezio stands in the crowded public square to watch the trial, he is horrified. Uberto denies ever seeing the papers and sentences the auditor men to death. Ezio watches from the crowd as his father and brothers are executed. He tries to rush the stage, but the guards are too many. He is forced to flee into the narrow alleys, his heart filled with a pain he has never known. Now a wanted man, Ezio hides his mother and sister in a safe house. They are silent and broken by the loss of their family. Ezio realizes he cannot stay in Florence, so he decides to lead them to their uncle's villa in the countryside. As they leave the city gates, they are ambushed by a group of men led by Viri de Pazzi, a young nobleman who has always hated Ezio. Just as they are about to be captured, a man with a loud voice and a heavy sword arrives. It is his uncle, Mario Auditore, who drives the attackers away and takes the family to the town of Monterigini. The town is small and sits on a hill, surrounded by old stone walls. Mario takes Ezio to a large villa at the top of the hill. Here, Mario reveals a secret that shocks Ezio. He explains that their family belongs to an ancient brotherhood called the Assassins. They have been fighting a secret war for centuries against a group called the Templars, who want to control the world through force. Ezio's father was a high-ranking member of this brotherhood, and that is why he was killed. Ezio is at first angry and refuses to join, wanting only to take his mother and sister to Spain to live in peace. Mario tells Ezio that the war has already found him and that he will never be safe if he runs. He challenges Ezio to a practice fight in the courtyard. Ezio is fast, but he lacks the discipline of a true warrior. Mario easily wins and tells him that he must learn to fight properly if he wants to survive. Ezio looks at his grieving mother and sister and realizes he has a responsibility to protect them and honor his father's name. He agrees to stay and begin his training, spending his days learning how to use the sword, the dagger, and the hidden blade. During his training, Ezio learns about the history of the assassins. He finds pages of a secret book called the Codex, written by a master named Altair. These pages contain designs for new weapons and better ways to move through the world. Mario explains that the Templars are searching for these pages to find a way to a secret vault. Ezio begins to see that his father's work was about more than just politics. It was about protecting the freedom of the human race. He starts to feel a sense of pride in the white robes he wears. Once he is skilled enough, Ezio decides to return to Florence for his first act of justice. He is looking for Uberto Alberti, the man who betrayed his family. He moves through the city like a shadow, using the skills he learned to climb the walls and hide in the crowds. He finds Uberto at an art show, surrounded by guards. Ezio waits for the perfect moment and strikes quickly. As the judge falls, Ezio stands over him and shouts to the crowd that the Auditor family is still alive. He leaves the city as the bells begin to ring, feeling the weight of his first kill. Back at the villa, Mario tells him that the man behind Uberto was part of a larger group. The Pazzi family in Florence is working with a powerful man in Rome to take control of all of Italy. Ezio realizes that his quest for revenge is tied to a much bigger conspiracy. He works with his uncle to gather information and rebuild the town of Monterigny. As the town grows stronger, more people come to help the assassins. Ezio finds comfort in the work, seeing the town prosper under his protection. He travels to a local workshop to find an old friend, a young inventor named Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo is a kind man who is fascinated by the Codex pages Ezio brings him. Using the designs in the book, Leonardo repairs Ezio's hidden blade and even makes it stronger. Their friendship becomes a bond of trust and creativity. Leonardo doesn't care about the war. He only cares about discovery. But his inventions become the most important tools in Ezio's journey. Ezio learns that Viri de Pazzi is gathering troops in the town of San Gimignano. He decides to head there to stop the threat before it can reach his family again. He stands on the hills, overlooking the towers of the town, watching the sun set. He is no longer the boy who ran through Florence looking for fun. He is a focused man with a purpose. He checks his blades and prepares to enter the town under the cover of darkness. The air is cool as he starts his descent. He knows that every step he takes brings him closer to the truth behind his father's death. He thinks about the creed his uncle spoke of, that nothing is true and everything is permitted. He is beginning to understand that this means he must be the master of his own destiny. With his hood pulled low, he walks toward the gates of the town, ready for the next part of his mission. Hunt for the Pazzi family leads Ezio to the town of San Gimignano, a place known for its many high stone towers that reach toward the sky. The air here is dry, and the ground is dusty from the constant travel of soldiers. Ezio meets his uncle Mario outside the city walls, where a small group of mercenaries is waiting. They plan to strike at the heart of the Pazzi leadership. Ezio moves through the outskirts of the town, using the tall grass and the shadows of the olive trees to stay hidden from the scouts. Inside the town, the atmosphere is tense. Vieri de' Pazzi is holding a meeting with his father and other powerful men. Ezio climbs one of the smaller towers to get a better view of the courtyard. He watches as a man in a dark cloak arrives, a man the others treat with great fear and respect. This man is Rodrigo Borgia, and it becomes clear that he is the one pulling the strings of the entire conspiracy. Ezio feels a cold shiver as he realizes that the enemies of his family are more powerful than he ever imagined. When the signal is given, Mario's men attack the main gates, drawing the guards away. Ezio uses this distraction to leap from the tower and pursue Vieri. They fight on the battlements as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the stone. Vieri is arrogant and cruel, but he is no match for the training Ezio has received. The fight is quick, and as Vieri falls, Ezio feels a brief moment of relief. However, Mario reminds him that a true assassin must show dignity, even to his enemies. They search Vieri's body and find a letter that points them back to Florence. Ezio returns to Florence, a city that feels different now that he is an outsider. He meets with a man named Lorenzo de' Medici, the leader of the city. Lorenzo was a close friend to Ezio's father and is also a target of the Pazzi family. The two men form an alliance as they both want to see the city at peace. Ezio agrees to act as a protector, watching over the Medici family from the shadows. He spends his nights patrolling the roofs near the Medici palace, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. The Pazzi family makes their move during a large religious service at the great cathedral. The square is packed with people, and the air is filled with the sound of bells and chanting. Suddenly, the Pazzi brothers pull out hidden daggers and attack Lorenzo and his brother, Giuliano. The peaceful square turns into a scene of chaos and blood. Ezio jumps from a high ledge into the middle of the fight, his hidden blade finding its mark as he defends the wounded Lorenzo. He manages to fight off the attackers, but Giuliano is lost in the struggle. Ezio helps the bleeding Lorenzo through the panicked crowds and back to the safety of his palace. The streets are filled with the sound of shouting as the people of Florence rise up against the Pazzi family for their betrayal. Lorenzo tells Ezio that the head of the family, Francesco de' Pazzi, has fled to the roof of the government palace. Ezio knows he must finish this now to prevent the city from falling into a full civil war. He runs toward the center of the city, his white robes stained with the dust of the battle. He scales the walls of the Palazzo Vecchio, the high stone building that towers over the square. The wind is strong at the top, and he can see the fires starting to burn in the distance. He finds Francesco de' Pazzi, who is desperate and cornered. Francesco tries to fight, but he is overwhelmed by Ezio's speed and focus. To show the city that the conspiracy has failed, the angry crowd below watches as the body of the traitor is dealt with. The power of the Pazzi in Florence is broken. But Ezio knows the trail does not end here. Lorenzo thanks Ezio for saving his life and gives him a beautiful cloak as a sign of his gratitude. He also gives Ezio the names of the other men who were involved in the plot. These men have fled to the countryside, seeking protection in the walled villas of the Tuscan hills. Ezio realizes that his list of targets is growing. He feels the weight of the task ahead, but he also feels a sense of duty to the city that was once his home. He says goodbye to Lorenzo and prepares to leave Florence once again. Before leaving, Ezio visits Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo has been studying more pages of the Codex and has created a new type of poison that can be used with the hidden blade. He also talks to Ezio about the mysterious man in the black cloak, Rodrigo Borgia. Leonardo is worried about the power this man holds and the ancient secrets he is trying to uncover. Ezio promises to stay careful and to bring back any more information he finds. He leaves the workshop, the smell of oil and paint fading as he steps out into the cool night air. Journey takes him back to the countryside, where he must hunt down the remaining conspirators one by one. He finds them hiding in abbeys and villas, thinking they are safe behind their stone walls. Ezio uses his skills to infiltrate these places, moving through the rafters and across the garden walls. He learns to use smoke bombs to confuse the guards, allowing him to strike and disappear before anyone knows he was there. Each man he finds tells him a little more about the Spanish man who leads them. As he travels, Ezio spends time reflecting on the lives he has taken. He thinks about the words of his uncle and the lessons in the Codex. He is starting to see that being an assassin is not just about killing. It is about protecting the balance of the world. He sees how the greed of the Templars causes suffering for the common people, and he feels a deep commitment to his cause. The rolling hills of Tuscany are beautiful, but he knows there is a darkness hiding in the palaces and the churches. The last of the Pazzi conspirators is found in a tall tower in the heart of the countryside. Ezio reaches the top and looks out over the landscape. He sees the road that leads toward the city of Venice, the great city of water. He knows that is where his journey will take him next. The sun is high in the sky, and the air is clear. He takes a moment to breathe, and then begins his descent, ready to follow the trail of the Templars to the edge of the sea. The trail of the Templars leads Ezio away from the hills of Tuscany and toward the northern coast. He learns that the men who escaped Florence are heading to the city of Venice. To get there, he must first pass through the wetlands and the fortified city of Forli. The air here is different from the dry heat of the south. It is damp and smells of the marsh and the salty spray of the nearby sea. The ground is often muddy, and a thick mist hangs over the water. Ezio travels with the documents he took from the Pazzi, knowing that the information inside is the only thing that will lead him to the man in the black cloak. In the city of Forli, Ezio meets a woman named Caterina Sforza. She is the ruler of the city and is known for being as brave as any soldier. She is stuck outside the city gates because of a problem with the guards, and Ezio helps her get back inside. Caterina is thankful and uses her influence to help Ezio find a boat that will take him across the water to Venice. While he waits for the boat, Ezio looks out at the great lagoon. He sees the shape of the city rising out of the water in the distance, a place of gold and marble that looks like it is floating on the waves. The boat ride to Venice is long and quiet. Ezio spends the time sharpening his blades and talking with Leonardo da Vinci, who has decided to move his workshop to the City of Water to find new inspiration. Leonardo is excited about the move, talking about the light and the way it reflects off the canals. As they arrive, Ezio is amazed by what he sees. There are no streets for horses or wagons. Instead, the city is connected by hundreds of stone bridges and narrow waterways filled with long, thin boats called gondolas. The air smells of salt and old stone. Ezio soon realizes that Venice is a city of masks and secrets. It is much easier to get lost here than in Florence. He is approached by a group of thieves led by a man named Antonio. These thieves know the city better than anyone. They tell Ezio that the man who controls the market district is Emilio Barbarigo, a wealthy merchant who is working for the Templars. Emilio has used his power to close off parts of the city and make life difficult for the common people. Antonio offers to help Ezio get close to Emilio if Ezio helps the thieves reclaim their territory. One of the thieves is a young woman named Rosa. She is fast and can climb the walls of the city better than most men. During a run through the streets, Rosa is wounded by a guard's arrow. Ezio rescues her and carries her back to the thieves' headquarters, moving through the shadows to avoid the patrols. After she is safe, Rosa teaches Ezio new ways to climb and jump across the wide gaps between the buildings. These new skills are essential because the palaces in Venice are built with smooth stone and high balconies that are hard to reach. Ezio begins his work by taking out the guards who protect Emilio's palace. He moves through the canals at night, the water making a soft, splashing sound against the hulls of the boats. He uses the high masts of the ships in the harbor to reach the rooftops. He feels the cold wind off the lagoon on his face as he watches the palace from above. He sees the way Emilio treats his servants and the way he hoards the wealth of the city. Ezio knows that removing this man is the only way to help the people of Venice breathe again. The night of the attack on the palace is dark and filled with a light rain. Ezio scales the walls of the Palazzo della Seta, his fingers finding small grips in the decorative stone. He reaches the central courtyard and finds Emilio meeting with other members of the Barbarigo family. They are talking about a secret meeting that will take place soon with the leader of the Templars. Ezio strikes from the shadows, his hidden blade finishing the task. As Emilio dies, he warns Ezio that the city belongs to the Templars and that one man cannot change the tide. With Emilio gone, the thieves are able to move freely through the market again. Antonio thanks Ezio and tells him that the next target is the Doge of Venice himself. The Doge is the leader of the city, but he is being poisoned slowly by a man named Carlo Grimaldi, who wants to replace him with a Templar puppet. Ezio realizes he must enter the Doge's palace to save the leader and stop the plot. The palace is the most heavily guarded building in the city, surrounded by water and high walls that no man can climb without being seen. Ezio goes to see Leonardo da Vinci to ask for help. Leonardo has been working on a project he calls the flying machine. It is a large frame of wood and cloth designed to act like the wings of a bird. Leonardo believes that if Ezio can get high enough, he can fly over the walls of the palace and land on the roof. They test the machine in the hills outside the city. Ezio feels the incredible pull of the air as he glides for a few moments, but the machine quickly loses height and crashes into the grass. Leonardo realizes the machine needs heat to stay in the air. He tells Ezio that the thieves must light large fires all over the city to create columns of warm air. Ezio spends the night coordinating with Antonio's men. They prepare piles of wood and straw on the rooftops and in the squares. The plan is dangerous, but it is the only way to reach the Doge in time. Ezio looks at the machine, then at the distant palace, and prepares himself for a journey through the sky. As the fires are lit, the city of Venice begins to glow with an orange light. Ezio takes off from a high tower, the wind rushing past his ears. He steers the machine through the columns of smoke, feeling the lift of the heat. He flies over the canals and the dark rooftops, the people below looking up in wonder at the great bird in the sky. He reaches the palace and lands on the balcony just as the guards start to shout. He rushes inside, the smell of the fires still clinging to his clothes. Inside the palace, he finds Carlo Grimaldi standing over the dying Doge. The room is quiet and smells of medicine and old parchment. Carlo has already finished his work, and the Doge is beyond saving. Carlo screams for the guards, accusing Ezio of the murder. Ezio is forced to fight his way out of the palace and dive into the cold water of the canal to escape. He returns to the Thieves' Guild, knowing that he is now the most wanted man in Venice. The city he tried to save now sees him as a killer, and the Templars have taken control of the government. The city of Venice is now a dangerous place for Ezio. Because he was blamed for the death of the Doge, his face is on posters across every stone bridge and square. The air feels heavy with the suspicion of the city guards. He has to trade his white hood for a common mask and move through the crowds like a ghost. He spends his days hiding in the secret rooms of the Thieves' Guild, listening to the sound of the water hitting the walls, and planning how to stop the new leaders of the city. The Templars have put a man named Marco Barbarigo in power, and the city is under a tight grip of fear. Ezio learns that Marco is planning a grand party during the Carnival, a time when everyone in the city wears masks and celebrates in the streets. This is the only time the new Doge will be out in public. To get an invitation to the private party on the water, Ezio must win a series of contests in the city squares. He spends the week competing in races across the rooftops and fighting in public rings. He moves with a speed and strength that surprises the onlookers, though they do not know who is behind the mask. He feels the cold winter air of the lagoon in his lungs as he leaps between the wooden poles in the canals. During the contests, he realizes that the Templars are cheating to make sure one of their own men wins the prize. Even though Ezio wins every event, the prize is given to a man named Dante Mauro, a large and powerful fighter who serves as a bodyguard for the Barbarigo family. Ezio does not let this stop him. With the help of the thieves and a group of women who work in the city, he manages to steal the golden mask that serves as the invitation. He prepares to enter the party, knowing that this is his best chance to reach the man at the top of the list. The party is held on a massive ship decorated with silk and gold lanterns. The music is loud, and the smell of expensive wine and perfume fills the air. Ezio moves through the dancers, his eyes fixed on Marco Barbarigo, who is sitting on a high throne and laughing. The ship is surrounded by smaller boats, and the water reflects the flickering light of the fireworks in the sky. Ezio uses a small, hidden gun that Leonardo made for him, a weapon that makes a sharp sound like a crack of thunder. He strikes his target and dives into the dark. Cold water before the guards can close in. With Marco gone, the power in Venice shifts to his brother, Agostino, who is a fair man and a friend to the assassins. The city begins to breathe again, and the posters with Ezio's face are taken down. However, the threat is not over. The two men who actually ran the plot, Silvio Barbarigo and Dante Mauro, have fled to the massive fortress of the Arsenale. This is the shipyard of Venice, a place of heavy iron gates, tall cranes, and the constant sound of hammers hitting wood. It is the heart of the city's military power, and it is heavily guarded by soldiers in thick armor. Ezio meets with Bartolomeo d'Alviano, a loud and brave mercenary leader who has been captured by the Templars. Ezio breaks into the cages and frees Bartolomeo and his men. They agree to help Ezio attack the Arsenale. The air in the shipyard is thick with the smell of tar and sawdust. As the mercenaries start a loud battle at the front gates, Ezio climbs the high wooden scaffolding to get inside. He moves through the half-finished hulls of great warships, his boots silent on the cedar planks. He finds Silvio and Dante near the docks, where they are trying to escape on a ship. The fight in the shipyard is fast and brutal. Dante is a strong warrior, but Ezio uses his agility to stay out of reach. He finishes the task, and as the two men fall, they reveal that they were only waiting for a ship from the east. This ship is carrying a great prize for the Prophet, the man who leads the Templars. Ezio realizes that everything he has done in Venice has been leading to a final meeting with Rodrigo Borgia. He stands on the docks as the sun rises over the Adriatic Sea, watching the horizon for the ship that carries the secrets of his father's past. He spends the next few weeks working with his friends to prepare for the ship's arrival. Leonardo da Vinci helps him decode more pages of the Codex, which talk about a piece of Eden that can control the minds of men. Ezio realizes that this is what the ship is carrying. He feels a sense of dread as he thinks about such power in the hands of a man like Rodrigo. He spends his nights sitting by the canals, watching the moon reflect on the water, and thinking about the boy he used to be in Florence. He is now a man of 30, and his life has been defined by this secret war. Ship finally arrives on a foggy morning. Ezio dresses as a common guard and slips onto the docks. He watches as a large wooden crate is moved from the ship to a group of men in black robes. He follows them through the city, moving from shadow to shadow. He sees the golden sphere for the first time as it is taken out of the box. It glows with a strange, soft light that seems to make the air vibrate. Ezio waits for the right moment and strikes, taking the object for himself and escaping into the mist. He brings the golden sphere to a secret meeting with his uncle Mario and the other assassins he has met on his journey. They gather in a quiet room, the light of the sphere reflecting off their faces. They explain that they have all been part of the same brotherhood, watching and testing Ezio for years. They tell him that he is the prophet mentioned in the ancient texts, the one who will open the door to a great secret. Ezio is humbled and a bit overwhelmed by the news, but he accepts his role with a steady heart. The group decides that the golden sphere, which they call the Apple of Eden, is too dangerous to keep in the city. They plan to take it to the mountains where it can be hidden. However, before they can leave, they are attacked by a group of Templar agents. In the chaos, the apple is stolen by a man in a black robe who vanishes into the night. Ezio is frustrated, but Mario tells him that they know where the man is going. The trail leads back to the mountains and the city of Forli. Ezio prepares for the journey back to the mainland. He says goodbye to his friends in Venice, the city that taught him how to be a shadow. He looks at the water one last time, knowing that the final battle is drawing closer. He feels the weight of the hidden blades on his wrists and the strength in his arms. He is ready to face the man in the black cloak and take back the object that holds the fate of the world. The wind pulls at his white robes as he steps onto the boat, heading toward the end of his long hunt. Ezio returns to the city of Forli to meet with Caterina Sforza and seek her help in protecting the Apple of Eden. The air in the wetlands is cold, and a thick gray mist hangs over the water. Caterina welcomes Ezio into her stone citadel, but the peace is quickly broken. Two brothers, Ludovico and Cecco Orsi, have been hired by the Templars to take the artifact and kidnap Caterina's children. The sound of heavy cannons begins to echo through the marshes as the Orsi brothers lead an army to the city gates. The smell of sulfur and wet earth fills the air as the siege begins. Ezio rushes to the battlements to defend the city. He moves through the smoke of the explosions, using his blades to stop the soldiers from climbing the walls. Despite his efforts, the Orsi brothers manage to slip into the city and take the children. Caterina is furious and refuses to give up the apple, telling Ezio that her children are strong enough to wait for a rescue. Ezio admires her courage and leaps from the high walls to track the brothers into the countryside. The ground is soft and muddy, making every step a struggle as he follows the tracks of their horses. He finds the brothers in a small camp in the middle of the wetlands. The tall grass hides his movements as he circles the tents. He manages to free the children and takes down the first brother, but the second brother, Cecco, stabs Ezio with a poisoned knife before he can react. Ezio finishes the fight and collapses on the damp ground, his vision blurring as the poison enters his blood. A man in a black monk's robe walks out of the mist and picks up the apple of Eden from Ezio's belt. The man does not say a word and disappears into the gray light of the morning. Ezio is found by Caterina's men and taken back to the city to recover. He spends weeks in a fever, dreaming of the golden sphere and the man in the black robe. When he finally wakes, he learns that the monk is a man named Girolamo Savonarola. Savonarola is a preacher who believes that the people of Italy have become too focused on art and money. He intends to use the power of the apple to force everyone to follow his strict rules. Ezio realizes that the danger to the world is now even greater than before. Once he is strong enough to travel, Ezio begins a hunt for the monk that lasts for many years. He follows rumors and leads through the small villages and mountain passes of Italy. The years pass, and Ezio grows older and wiser. He spends time in the mountains, training his mind as well as his body. He understands that the apple is not just a weapon, but a tool that can change the way people think. He feels a great weight of responsibility, knowing that it was his mistake that allowed Savonarola to take it. The trail finally leads back to Florence, the city where everything began. When Ezio arrives, he finds the city has changed. The joy and the art that once filled the streets are gone. Savonarola has taken control of the city and is forcing the people to burn their most prized possessions. Great bonfires are lit in the squares, and the air is thick with the black smoke of burning books and paintings. This is known as the bonfire of the vanities. The people move through the streets with their heads down, their eyes dull and empty. Ezio meets with Machiavelli, who is now a high-ranking member of the Brotherhood. Machiavelli tells him that Savonarola has 9 lieutenants who are helping him keep the city under his spell. These men are spread across Florence, using their positions to bully and control the citizens. Ezio knows that he must take out all 9 men to weaken the preacher's grip on the city. He moves through the familiar streets, seeing the places where he played as a boy now guarded by men with cold eyes and heavy clubs. The hunt for the 9 lieutenants takes Ezio to every corner of Florence. He finds a doctor who is withholding medicine from the poor, and a merchant who is burning beautiful silks. He climbs the familiar stone walls of the palaces, his movements slower than they used to be, but more precise. He strikes from the shadows, removing the men one by one. Each time a lieutenant falls, a small part of the city seems to wake up from a deep sleep. the people begin to whisper in the alleys, wondering if the time for a change has finally come. One of the targets is a famous artist who has been forced to destroy his own work. Ezio finds him in a quiet studio, surrounded by broken statues and torn canvas. The man is weeping for the loss of the beauty he created. Ezio realizes that Savonarola is not just controlling the people's actions, but is trying to destroy their souls. He finishes his task and leaves the studio, feeling a quiet anger. He knows that the final confrontation in the main square is coming soon. The last of the 9 men is a general who protects the palace where Savonarola is hiding. Ezio leads a group of citizens in a small riot to draw the guards away from the gates. He uses the chaos to climb to the balcony where the general is watching the crowd. The fight is loud and draws the attention of the people below. When the general falls, the crowd begins to shout for Savonarola to come out. The spell of the apple is starting to break as the people realize their leaders are not invincible. Savonarola finally appears on a wooden stage in the center of the square, holding the apple of Eden high above his head. The golden sphere glows with a blinding light, and for a moment, the crowd falls silent and still. Ezio knows he only has one chance. He uses a small throwing knife to hit Savonarola's hand, causing the apple to fall to the ground. A thief in the crowd grabs the object and runs into the narrow streets. The people, now fully awake and angry, rush the stage and capture the preacher. Ezio retrieves the apple from the thief and returns to the square. He watches as the people lead Savonarola to the same place where Ezio's father was executed. As the flames of a new fire are lit, Ezio moves through the crowd. He believes that no man should suffer such a death, even a man who did so much harm. He ends the preacher's life with his hidden blade before the flames can reach him. He stands before the people of Florence and tells them to follow their own path and believe in their own freedom. He leaves the city as the sun sets, the apple once again safe in his hands. Ezio meets with his fellow assassins in a quiet room outside the city. They look at the apple of Eden as it sits on a wooden table, its golden surface smooth and silent. They have finally decoded the last of the secret pages, and the map they formed shows that the final vault is hidden in Rome. Specifically, it is located beneath the Vatican. Ezio realizes that his long hunt is coming to an end. He is now a man in his late 40s, his beard streaked with gray, and his body marked by years of battle. He puts on his white robes and prepares for the final journey south. The air in Rome is dry and carries the scent of dust and old stone. The city is a place of massive ruins and golden churches, all standing under the shadow of the great dome of the cathedral. Ezio learns that his greatest enemy, Rodrigo Borgia, has now become the Pope. This gives Rodrigo the power of an entire empire and the protection of the most sacred office in the world. Ezio knows he cannot fight an army of thousands, so he must use the shadows to reach the heart of the Vatican alone. He begins his approach as the sun sets, turning the Tiber River into a ribbon of dark gold. He scales the high stone walls of the Leonine city, his fingers finding grip in the cracks of the ancient masonry. He moves across the rooftops, looking down at the Swiss guards who patrol the courtyards with long spears and lanterns. He feels the weight of the apple in his pouch, a constant reminder of the power he is trying to keep out of the wrong hands. The moon rises over the city, casting long shadows that become Ezio's only friends. He finds a way into the secret passages that lead toward the Sistine Chapel. The air inside the walls is cold and smells of damp earth and old incense. He moves through the rafters, looking down at the beautiful paintings that cover the ceiling. Far below, he sees Rodrigo Borgia standing at the altar. Rodrigo is dressed in heavy robes of white silk and gold thread, holding a tall staff that is topped with a large, glowing gemstone. Ezio realizes that the staff is another piece of Eden, and together with the apple, it will open the way to the vault. Ezio drops from the ceiling, landing silently on the marble floor. Rodrigo is not surprised to see him. The two men speak, their voices echoing in the vast, empty room. Rodrigo believes that he has been chosen by God to lead the world, and that the secrets in the vault will prove his divinity. Ezio tells him that he is just a man who has caused too much suffering. The fight begins, but it is not a normal duel. Rodrigo uses the power of the staff to create illusions, making Ezio see copies of the Pope all around him. Ezio uses the apple to protect his mind, the two artifacts clashing with a sound like a ringing bell. The battle is long and tires both men. They move from the chapel into a hidden chamber beneath the floor. Ezio manages to disarm Rodrigo, but he does not kill him. He stands over the fallen man and tells him that his revenge is finished and that the blood of the Auditor family has been answered. He takes the staff and the apple and places them into two slots on a massive stone wall at the back of the chamber. The air begins to vibrate, and the heavy stone doors slide open with a grinding sound that shakes the entire building. Inside the vault, the world changes. The room is filled with a soft, golden light that seems to come from the air itself. The walls are covered in strange, glowing lines and symbols that Ezio does not recognize. He walks into the center of the room and sees a figure standing in the light. It is a woman named Minerva. She looks human, but she is taller and moves with a grace that is not of this world. She speaks to Ezio, but she tells him that her words are not meant for his ears. She is using him as a bridge to speak to someone far in the future. Minerva tells a story of a great disaster that almost destroyed the world thousands of years ago. She explains that her people, the first civilization, created the pieces of Eden to help humanity, but the objects were misused and lost. She warns that a second disaster is coming and that the world must be prepared. Ezio stands in the center of the golden room, his mind filled with questions he cannot ask. He realizes that his whole life, the death of his family, and his years as an assassin were all part of a plan he is only just beginning to understand. The light begins to fade, and the figure of Minerva vanishes into the shadows. The vault begins to close, and Ezio steps back into the chamber under the chapel. He finds the staff and the apple have lost their glow, looking like simple metal once again. He leaves Rodrigo Borgia sitting on the floor, a broken man who has lost his dream of power. Ezio climbs back out into the night air of Rome, feeling a sense of peace mixed with a new, heavy mystery. He meets his uncle Mario and the other assassins at the edge of the city. They watch as the sun begins to rise over the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Ezio tells them what he saw in the vault. They listen in silence, realizing that their war is part of something much bigger than the politics of Italy. They agree to keep the secret of the vault safe and to prepare for whatever comes next. Ezio looks at his hands, seeing the scars of his journey, and knows that he has finally fulfilled his father's legacy. They begin the journey back to the north, toward the villa in Monterigny. Ezio thinks about the road he has traveled since that day in the square in Florence. He has become a master of his craft and a leader of men. He has found friends who are more like brothers and has protected the freedom of his people. The air is fresh, and the birds are starting to sing in the olive trees. He feels the warmth of the sun on his face and knows that for a time there will be peace. The story of the Auditor family has reached its conclusion, but the story of the assassins continues. Ezio hangs his white robes in his room at the villa, looking out over the town he helped rebuild. He knows that he will always be ready to pick up the blade if he is needed, but for now, he is happy to be a man of the earth. He watches the people of the town go about their day, free and safe, and he knows that every struggle he faced was worth the effort. The struggle for the future of the Brotherhood and the safety of the artifact took Ezio back to the damp and misty lands of Forli. The city was a fortress made of heavy gray stone, sitting in the middle of a vast marshland where the air always smelled of salt and wet earth. Ezio traveled there to meet with Caterina Sforza, the countess who ruled the city with a firm hand and a brave heart. He carried the apple of Eden with him, knowing that the Templars would stop at nothing to take it back. The walls of the citadel were thick, but as Ezio approached, he could see the signs of tension in the guards who watched the horizon from the high battlements. Caterina welcomed Ezio with the respect of an old ally. They stood in the central courtyard, surrounded by the sound of soldiers sharpening their swords and the distant call of water birds in the reeds. She agreed to help him hide the apple within the deepest vaults of the fortress, believing that the strength of Forli would be enough to keep the world safe. However, before the sun could set, the quiet of the wetlands was broken by the thunderous sound of cannons. The Orsi brothers, two mercenaries who had sold their souls to the Templar cause, had arrived with a massive army to lay siege to the city. The battle began with a rain of fire and iron that shook the very foundations of the citadel. Ezio rushed to the walls, his white robes catching the wind as he moved between the towers. The air was filled with the thick, black smoke of gunpowder and the shouting of men as the enemy tried to scale the stone walls with heavy wooden ladders. Ezio worked alongside the defenders, using his blades to push back the attackers. He moved with a focused energy, knowing that if the gates fell, the apple would be lost to the men who wanted to use it to enslave the minds of the people. In the middle of the chaos, a messenger arrived with terrible news. The Orsi brothers had not just come to fight a war. They had used the confusion to slip into the city and kidnap Caterina's children. They sent a message to the walls, demanding that the Countess surrender the Apple of Eden in exchange for the lives of her daughter and son. Ezio watched as Caterina stood on the ramparts, her face a mask of iron. She refused to give in to the threats, telling the brothers that her children were strong and that she would never betray her city or her allies. Ezio saw the pain behind her eyes and knew he had to act immediately. He leaped from the high walls into the soft mud of the marshes below, disappearing into the thick gray mist that hung over the water. He tracked the mercenaries through the tall grass, his boots making no sound as he navigated the treacherous terrain. He found their camp hidden in a cluster of old trees, where the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat drifted through the damp air. He moved from shadow to shadow, taking out the guards one by one, until he reached the tent where the children were being held. He freed them and guided them back toward the city, moving through the undergrowth like a predator. However, the mission was far from over. As he reached the outskirts of the camp, he was confronted by Ludovico Orsi. The man was a giant, dressed in heavy iron plates and carrying a massive axe. The fight was a test of everything Ezio had learned about patience and speed. He avoided the heavy swings of the axe, waiting for the moment when the armor left a small gap. He finished the fight and turned to leave, but he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. The second brother, Cecco, had been waiting in the shadows. Cecco was faster and more cunning than his brother. He struck with a poisoned dagger, the cold metal catching Ezio in the side before he could turn. Ezio felt the sting of the toxin entering his blood, a cold fire that made his limbs feel heavy and his vision go dark at the edges. With a final burst of strength, he drove his hidden blade into Cecco, ending the threat of the Orsi brothers forever. But as he collapsed onto the wet ground, the world began to spin. He saw a figure approaching through the mist, a man dressed in the simple black robes of a monk. The monk did not speak. He walked calmly to where Ezio lay and reached into the pouch at his belt. He took the Apple of Eden, the golden sphere glowing with a soft, haunting light in the dim morning air. Ezio tried to reach for him, but his muscles would not obey. He watched as the man turned and walked back into the fog, taking the fate of Italy with him. The last thing Ezio saw before he lost consciousness was the sight of the children running toward the safety of the city gates, their voices small and distant in the wind. Ezio woke up several days later in a warm bed inside the citadel. The air smelled of herbs and clean linen, and the sound of the marsh was a quiet hum outside the window. Caterina was there, her face softened by the safety of her children, but lined with worry for the lost artifact. She told him that the monk was a man named Savonarola, a preacher who had been seen in the city during the battle. He was a man who spoke of the end of the world and the need for a strict, new order. Ezio realized that his error had put the most dangerous object in the world into the hands of a man who believed he was doing God's work. Once his strength returned, Ezio spent hours walking the battlements of Forli, looking out over the water. He felt a deep sense of failure, but also a new, quiet determination. He knew that the war with the Templars was moving into a new phase. It was no longer just about the greed of the Pazzi or the ambition of the Barbarigo. It was about the battle for the hearts and minds of the people. He prepared his gear and said his farewells to Caterina, knowing that he would have to find Savonarola before the preacher could use the apple to destroy the spirit of the Renaissance. He traveled back toward the mountains, his mind focused on the trail of the black-robed monk. He spent his nights by small fires, reading the journals of his father and the pages of the Codex. He thought about the responsibility of being an assassin and the weight of the secrets he carried. The wind in the mountain passes was cold and lonely, but he did not feel alone. He felt the presence of those who had gone before him, guiding his steps toward the final truth. He knew that the path would lead him back to Florence, the city of his birth, and the place where his journey would ultimately find its meaning. As the sun rose over the peaks of the Apennines, Ezio looked down at the valleys below. The world was vast and full of beauty, but it was also a place where shadows could grow if left unchecked. He pulled his white hood over his head, the fabric shielding him from the morning chill. He was a man of 40 years now, his beard showing the first signs of gray, but his eyes were as sharp as they had been on the day he first climbed the towers of Florence. He stepped onto the road, ready to chase the shadow of the monk into the heart of the storm. The road back to Florence was not the same path Ezio had traveled as a young man. The air in the mountain passes was thin and bitingly cold, carrying the scent of frozen pine and old, wet earth. Ezio moved with a steady, measured pace, his body feeling the weight of the years and the scars of his many battles. He spent his nights in small, quiet inns or under the shelter of rocky overhangs, his mind always returning to the image of the monk in the black robes. He knew that Savonarola was not like the men he had hunted before. The monk did not want gold or land. He wanted the very souls of the people, and he now had the apple of Eden to help him take them. As Ezio descended from the mountains and saw the familiar red dome of the Florence Cathedral in the distance, he noticed that the light over the city seemed different. Usually, Florence glowed with a warm, golden hue, reflecting the energy of the artists and merchants who filled its streets. Now, a thick, dark smoke hung over the rooftops, obscuring the sun. The air that reached his lungs was bitter, smelling of charred wood and burnt paper. He entered the city through a side gate, moving quietly past guards who seemed to be in a trance. Their eyes fixed on nothing as they gripped their spears with white-knuckled intensity. The Florence he found was a shadow of its former self. The markets were silent, and the colorful banners that used to hang from the balconies had been replaced by plain black cloth. People walked with their heads bowed, moving quickly from one stone building to another, as if afraid to be noticed. In the center of the main squares, massive bonfires were burning. These were the bonfires of the Vanities, where Savonarola's followers were throwing anything they considered sinful. Ezio watched from the darkness of an alley as a group of men threw a pile of beautiful leather-bound books and a lutes into the flames. The crackle of the fire was the only sound in the square. Ezio met with Machiavelli in a small cellar beneath a bakery. The room was lit by a single flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows against the brick walls. Machiavelli explained that the monk had used the apple to convince the people that their art and their wealth were the cause of all their suffering. To keep the city under his control, Savonarola had appointed 9 lieutenants, men who had been given power in exchange for their absolute loyalty. These men were stationed across the different districts of Florence, acting as the eyes and ears of the preacher. Ezio knew that the only way to reach the monk was to remove these 9 pillars of support. The hunt began in the early hours of the morning, when the fog from the river Arno crept into the streets. Ezio's first target was a wealthy merchant who had turned into a cruel enforcer of the monk's rules. The man was overseeing the destruction of a shipment of fine silk near the docks. Ezio moved across the damp rooftops, his boots finding grip on the slick tiles. He watched the merchant from a stone chimney, seeing the way the man mocked the weavers who were losing their livelihood. Ezio dropped down with the silence of a falling leaf, his hidden blade ending the merchant's greed in a single motion. He vanished back into the fog before the guards could even draw their swords. As the days passed, Ezio moved from district to district, his list of targets growing shorter. He found a doctor in the medical quarter who was refusing to treat the sick unless they confessed their sins to the monk. The air in the doctor's study was heavy with the smell of dried herbs and old blood. Ezio entered through a high window, moving through the rafters like a shadow. He saw the fear in the doctor's eyes when he finally appeared, a silent messenger of justice. With each man he removed, Ezio felt the heavy atmosphere of the city begin to lift just a little, as if the people were slowly waking up from a long, dark dream. The 4th lieutenant was a high-ranking soldier who had taken over the barracks near the city gates. This mission required more than just stealth. It required a distraction. Ezio worked with a group of local rebels to start a small fire in a nearby hay barn. As the guards rushed to put out the flames, Ezio scaled the stone walls of the barracks. He found the soldier in the central courtyard, practicing with a heavy broadsword. The fight was a test of Ezio's agility against the man's raw strength. The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed off the stone walls. But Ezio's speed eventually found a gap in the soldier's armor. in the southern part of the city, he tracked down a priest who was using his sermons to incite the mob to violence. The priest lived in a small, well-guarded tower that overlooked a public square. Ezio had to use the hook-like decorations on the building's facade to climb to the top. The wind at that height was strong, pulling at his white robes as he moved toward the open window. Inside, the room was filled with the smell of expensive incense and the sound of the priest practicing his next speech. Ezio finished the task and stood on the balcony for a moment, looking out over the city he loved. He could see the bonfires still burning, but they seemed smaller now, their light flickering in the wind. The 6th and 7th lieutenants were a pair of cousins who controlled the flow of water and food into the city. They were hiding in a large villa surrounded by high garden walls. The gardens were filled with the scent of lemon trees and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the smoke-filled streets outside. Ezio moved through the trees, his white hood blending with the blossoms. He used a smoke bomb to confuse the guards near the fountain, the thick gray cloud allowing him to reach his targets and disappear before the air cleared. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the people of Florence would soon have their basic needs met without the monks' interference. The final 2 lieutenants were the most difficult to reach. They were stationed at the gates of the government palace, where Savonarola himself was hiding. They were protected by a large company of elite guards who did not seem to be under the apple's influence, but were simply men who enjoyed the power the monk gave them. Ezio spent an entire day watching their patterns from a nearby bell tower. He realized that a direct attack would be impossible. He would have to use the very people Savonarola was trying to control to create a way inside. He began to spread word through the markets and the alleys, telling the people that the time for their freedom was at hand. As the sun set on the final day of the hunt, Ezio stood on the roof of a building overlooking the palace square. He could see the last 2 lieutenants standing at the top of the stairs, their armor glowing in the light of the torches. He felt the cold metal of his hidden blades against his wrists and the weight of the years in his bones. He knew that the next few hours would decide the fate of Florence. He took a deep breath of the smoke-filled air and prepared to give the signal. The people were starting to gather in the shadows of the square, their faces no longer bowed in fear, but turned upward toward the man in the white hood. The hunt for the 9 lieutenants was nearly complete, and the path to the monk was finally open. Ezio looked at the red dome of the cathedral one last time, remembering the boy he used to be when he first ran across these roofs. He was no longer seeking revenge for his father. He was fighting for the right of every person in the city to live their own life and think their own thoughts. He stepped off the edge of the roof, his robes snapping in the wind as he descended toward the final battle for the soul of Florence. The final day of the hunt for the monk began with a heavy silence that hung over the city of Florence. The air was thick with the smell of old ash and the bitter scent of the river as the morning fog began to lift. Ezio stood on the high balcony of a stone building, his eyes fixed on the government palace where Savonarola had retreated. The 9 lieutenants were gone, and the preacher's grip on the city was starting to slip. Without his enforcers, the monk was forced to come out into the open to face the growing anger of the people. Ezio watched as a large wooden platform was built in the center of the square, right in front of the palace gates. Savonarola finally stepped onto the platform. His black robes a sharp contrast against the pale stone of the square. He held the apple of Eden high above his head, and as the golden sphere began to glow with a pulsing white light, the crowd below fell into a forced silence. Ezio felt the strange pull of the artifact even from his distant perch. He knew that if he did not act quickly, the monk would use the power of the apple to crush the spirit of the people once again. He moved across the rooftops with a steady focus, his boots silent on the red tiles as he positioned himself directly above the stage. Just as Savonarola began to speak, his voice booming across the square, Ezio launched a small throwing knife. The metal glinted in the sun for a split second before hitting the monk's hand. The golden sphere slipped from his fingers and bounced off the wooden planks of the stage. A young thief, who had been waiting in the shadows of the crowd, darted forward and snatched the apple before it could hit the ground. The thief disappeared into the maze of narrow alleys, and the sudden loss of the artifact caused the crowd to wake up. The people, now free from the monk's spell, rushed the stage with a roar of anger. Ezio had to make a choice. He could stay and ensure the monk was captured, or he could chase the thief to recover the most dangerous object in the world. He turned and leaped from the balcony, his white robes snapping in the wind as he began a high-speed chase across the rooftops. The thief was fast and knew the city well, leading Ezio through the laundry lines and over the flower boxes of the residential districts. The air was filled with the sound of their breathing and the rhythmic thud of their boots on the wood and stone. Ezio used his years of experience to predict the thief's turns, finally cornering him on a narrow bridge over a small canal. He retrieved the apple of Eden, feeling the cold weight of the golden sphere in his hand. It was silent now, its light extinguished, but Ezio could feel the power vibrating deep within the metal. He carefully placed it in his leather pouch and returned to the main square. The scene there had turned grim. The people had taken Savonarola to the same place where Ezio's father and brothers had been executed years ago. They had built a fire and intended to let the monk suffer for the pain he had caused the city. Ezio stood at the edge of the crowd, looking at the man who had tried to steal the soul of Florence. Ezio believed that even a man as misguided as Savonarola deserved a quick end. He did not want the city to be defined by the same cruelty it was trying to escape. He moved through the crowd, the people stepping aside as they recognized the man in the white hood. He stepped onto the platform and ended the monk's life with a single, precise strike of his hidden blade before the flames could reach him. The square became quiet as Ezio turned to face the thousands of people. He did not speak of revenge or power. He told them that they must learn to be their own masters, and that no one had the right to tell them what to believe. With the preacher gone, the city of Florence began to slowly return to life. The black cloths were taken down from the balconies, and the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke replaced the scent of the bonfires. Ezio met with his allies, including his uncle Mario and the wise Machiavelli, in a secret garden hidden behind a high stone wall. They sat among the rose bushes and the lemon trees, the apple of Eden sitting on a stone table between them. They knew that the final piece of the map was now clear. The trail led to Rome, to a secret vault hidden beneath the very heart of the Vatican. Ezio spent his final night in Florence, walking the streets he had known as a child. He visited the house where he was born, looking up at the windows and remembering the sound of his mother's voice and his brother's laughter. He felt a deep sense of closure, knowing that he had finally cleared the shadows from his home. He was now a man of 45 years, and the long hunt that had consumed his life was reaching its final destination. He felt a quiet strength in his limbs and a clarity in his mind that he had never possessed in his youth. The next morning, the group began the journey south toward the Papal States. The air grew warmer as they moved away from the mountains and toward the coastal plains. Ezio watched the changing landscape, from the olive groves of Tuscany to the dry, dusty roads that led to the capital. He spent the time studying the codex pages one last time, trying to understand the message that the ancient people had left behind. He realized that the vault was not just a place of treasure, but a place of knowledge that could either save the world or destroy it if it fell into the hands of the Templars. As they reached the outskirts of Rome, Ezio saw the massive walls of the city rising out of the plains. The city was a sprawling maze of ancient ruins and new churches, all ruled by the man who had become his greatest enemy. Rodrigo Borgia was now the Pope, and he held the papal staff, the second piece of the key required to open the vault. Ezio knew that he would have to infiltrate the most heavily guarded place in the world. He checked his blades and his armor, the black and silver metal of the master assassin's gear reflecting the light of the setting sun. He said his farewells to his companions, insisting that he must enter the Vatican alone. He did not want to risk any more lives in a battle that was ultimately his to finish. Mario gave him a steady nod, and Machiavelli handed him a final map of the underground passages beneath the cathedral. Ezio pulled his hood over his eyes and moved toward the city gates as the first stars began to appear in the sky. The air was still and carried the scent of incense and old dust. He felt the weight of the apple against his side, a constant reminder of the stakes of the coming night. The final part of the journey had begun. Ezio moved through the shadows of the Roman streets, avoiding the patrols of the papal guard. He looked up at the great dome of the cathedral, a massive shape against the dark blue of the night. He knew that inside those walls, the man who had ordered the death of his family was waiting. He felt no anger, only a cold, hard sense of duty. He began his climb up the outer walls of the Leonine city, his fingers finding the cracks in the ancient stone as he moved toward the end of his story. The air in Rome was dry and heavy, with the scent of old stone, incense, and the stagnant water of the Tiber River. Ezio stood in the shadows of a ruined archway, looking toward the massive walls of the Vatican. He was now a man of 48 years, and the weight of nearly 3 decades of conflict rested on his shoulders. He wore the black armor of Altair, a suit of metal that felt as light as silk, but provided the protection he needed for the task ahead. In his pouch, the apple of Eden sat silent, its golden surface cool against his side. He knew that Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, was preparing to use the papal staff to unlock a power that had been hidden for thousands of years. The infiltration of the Leonine city began under a moonless sky. Ezio moved with a grace that defied his age, scaling the sheer stone walls of the Vatican with practiced ease. He found his way onto the high rooftops, looking down at the courtyards where Swiss guards walked their rounds with glowing lanterns and long halberds. The city within a city was a maze of gardens, libraries, and chapels, all guarded by the most elite soldiers in Italy. Ezio moved like a shadow through the rafters of the long galleries, his boots making no sound on the wooden beams as he bypassed the patrols below. He reached the secret passages that led toward the Sistine Chapel, the heart of the Pope's private quarters. The air inside the stone corridors was thin and smelled of damp earth and centuries of secrets. Ezio moved through the hidden spaces behind the walls, listening to the muffled sounds of chanting and the distant ringing of bells. He found a high vantage point overlooking the chapel itself, where the ceiling was covered in the incredible paintings of the heavens. Below him, at the great altar, stood Rodrigo Borgia. The man was dressed in heavy robes of white and gold, his face aged by the burden of his own ambition. Rodrigo held the papal staff, a tall rod of silver and gold topped with a large, glowing gemstone. Ezio realized that the staff was the second piece of the key, an artifact of the first civilization designed to interact with the apple. As Ezio dropped from the rafters and landed on the marble floor, the sound of his boots echoed through the vast, empty room. Rodrigo turned, his eyes showing no surprise, only a cold and weary recognition. He spoke of his belief that he was the prophet mentioned in the ancient texts, and that the vault beneath the floor contained the voice of God. Ezio replied that he was only a man who had come to finish a long overdue debt. The battle that followed was unlike any Ezio had ever faced. It was not just a clash of steel, but a struggle of ancient powers. Rodrigo used the staff to create illusions, filling the chapel with multiple versions of himself that attacked from all sides. Ezio used the apple of Eden to shield his mind, the golden sphere glowing with a blinding white light that pushed back the shadows. They moved across the chapel floor, their breathing heavy in the still air. Ezio managed to disarm the Pope, but Rodrigo used a hidden mechanism to open a trapdoor beneath the altar. The two men fell into the dark, landing in a secret chamber deep beneath the earth. The chamber was a place of smooth, gray stone and strange, glowing lines of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air down here was ancient and smelled of nothing at all, as if time itself had stopped. Rodrigo, exhausted and broken, crawled toward a massive stone door at the back of the room. He pleaded for the secrets of the vault, his voice shaking with a desperate need for power. Ezio stood over him, his hidden blade extended. He looked at the man who had ordered the death of his father and brothers, but he felt no anger. He realized that killing Rodrigo would not change the past, and that the cycle of blood had to end. He retracted his blade and told the Pope that he would leave him to his own failures. Ezio took the apple and the staff and placed them into two circular slots on the great door. The room began to vibrate, and a low, humming sound filled the air. The heavy stone wall slid open, revealing a path into a room that was filled with a soft, golden glow. Ezio stepped inside, leaving the broken Pope behind. The vault was a place of incredible technology that looked like magic to a man of the Renaissance. The walls were covered in moving patterns of light, and the floor felt as smooth as glass. In the center of the room, a figure began to form out of the flickering golden particles. It was a woman named Minerva, a member of the first civilization who had died thousands of years before history began. She looked human, but she was taller and wore clothes made of shifting light. She spoke to Ezio, but she told him that she was not speaking to him at all. She was using his eyes and ears as a bridge to reach someone far in the future. She told a story of a great disaster, a fire from the sun that had nearly destroyed the world. She explained that her people had built the vaults to protect the earth, but they had failed to save themselves. She warned that the disaster would happen again, and that the humanity of the future must be ready. Ezio stood in the center of the golden room, his mind filled with a sense of awe and confusion. He realized that his entire life, the loss of his family, and his years of training were all part of a plan that spanned millennia. He was a messenger, a link in a chain that connected the ancient past to a future he could not imagine. Minerva finished her message and looked through Ezio, calling out to a name he did not recognize. Then the golden light began to fade, and the figure vanished into the shadows of the vault. The machines slowed their humming, and the room grew dark and silent. Ezio stepped back out into the chamber where Rodrigo was still sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. The Pope had heard nothing of the message. To him, the vault was empty and silent. Ezio took the apple of Eden, but left the staff behind, knowing that its power was spent. He climbed back up through the secret passages and emerged into the cool night air of Rome. He felt a profound sense of peace. The debt was paid, the mystery of the vault was revealed, and his journey as a seeker of revenge was finally over. He was an assassin, a protector of a truth that was much larger than his own life. He met his uncle Mario at the edge of the city as the first light of dawn began to touch the tops of the ruins. They walked together away from the Vatican, the air fresh and smelling of the morning dew. Ezio told Mario what he had seen and heard, and his uncle listened with a quiet respect. They knew that the world was still a dangerous place, and that the Templars would not disappear, but they had won a great victory for the freedom of mankind. Ezio looked toward the northern horizon, thinking of the villa in Monterigny and the quiet life he hoped to find there. The night in the Vatican had changed him. He was no longer the boy from Florence or the man from Venice. He was the mentor, the one who held the secrets of the past and the hopes of the future. As they reached the hills overlooking the city, Ezio looked back at the dome of the cathedral one last time. The sun was rising, casting long, golden rays across the landscape of Italy. He pulled his hood low and stepped onto the road home, his heart steady and his mind clear, ready to lead the Brotherhood into a new era. The journey back to the hills of Tuscany was a quiet one, filled with the scent of dry grass and the gentle heat of the afternoon sun. Ezio traveled with a slow and steady heart, the apple of Eden tucked safely away in his pack. He arrived at the gates of Monterigny to find the town thriving. The stone walls he had helped rebuild were strong, and the gardens were overflowing with green vines and bright flowers. His sister, Claudia, and his mother were there to meet him at the villa. For the first time in many years, the house felt like a place of rest rather than a fortress of war. The air in the courtyard was cool and smelled of lavender and clean stone. Ezio spent his days walking through the sanctuary beneath the villa, looking at the statues of the master assassins. He felt a deep connection to the history of the Brotherhood, but he also felt the weight of the message he had received in the vault. He shared the story with his uncle Mario, explaining that the war they fought was part of a much larger struggle to protect the world from a future disaster. Mario listened with a quiet gravity, realizing that his nephew had become the true leader of their order. Ezio was no longer just a soldier. He was the mentor, the man responsible for the wisdom and safety of all who wore the hood. He decided it was time to officially induct his sister, Claudia, into the Brotherhood. She had managed the affairs of the villa for years with a sharp mind and a brave spirit. In a quiet ceremony held in the central hall, Ezio marked her finger with fire, welcoming her as a full member of the order. The room was filled with the soft glow of candles and the smell of old parchment and wood smoke. It was a moment of pride for the family, a sign that the Auditor legacy was about to enter a new and stronger chapter. Ezio felt a sense of peace, knowing that if he were to fall, there were others ready to carry the light forward. However, the peace did not mean that Ezio's work was finished. He spent his nights writing in his journals, trying to make sense of the visions from the vault. He also worked with Machiavelli to expand the network of the assassins across Italy. They established secret hideouts in small villages and sent messengers to distant cities. Ezio wanted to ensure that the Brotherhood was not just a group of fighters, but a community of people who protected the freedom of their neighbors. He often sat on the balcony of the villa, looking out over the valley and thinking about the boy he had been in Florence. He realized that every tragedy he had faced had prepared him for this role. During this time, Ezio received a visit from his old friend Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo had come to the villa to see the apple of Eden for himself. The two men sat in the library, the golden sphere sitting between them on a heavy oak table. Leonardo was fascinated by the patterns of light that moved across the metal, seeing it as a masterpiece of a science he could not yet understand. They talked long into the night about the nature of the universe and the possibility of other worlds. Leonardo's curiosity was a reminder to Ezio that the world was still full of wonder, even after all the darkness he had seen. Ezio also focused on the training of the new recruits who came to the villa. He taught them that being an assassin was about more than just the blade. It was about the discipline of the mind and the commitment to the truth. He led them through the hills, showing them how to move with the environment and how to stay calm in the heat of a struggle. He watched as a new generation of men and women took their first leaps of faith from the high towers, their white robes snapping in the wind. He saw the same fire in their eyes that had once burned in his own, and it gave him hope for the years to come. As the months passed, Ezio began to feel a strange sense of unease. He knew that the Borgia family was still powerful in Rome, and that Cesare, the son of Rodrigo, was building a massive army of his own. He spent his evenings on the battlements, looking toward the southern horizon. The air was often still, but it carried a feeling of a coming storm. He made sure that the town's defenses were always ready and that the hidden tunnels beneath the villa were clear. He wanted Monterigny to be a sanctuary for anyone who sought freedom, a place that the shadows could never reach. He spent a lot of time with his mother, who had finally found her voice again after many years of silence. They would sit in the garden and talk about the family they had lost. She told him stories about his father's kindness and his brother's playful spirits. These memories were no longer painful. They were like a warm light that guided his heart. Ezio realized that he had not just saved Florence and Rome, but he had saved the memory of his family. He felt a deep gratitude for the path he had walked, even with all its hardships. The year 1499 came to a close with a great feast in the town square. The people of Monterigny celebrated the turn of the century with music, dancing, and large tables filled with bread, wine, and roasted meats. Ezio stood on the balcony of the villa, watching the celebration below. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of wood smoke and autumn leaves. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The boy who had run through the streets of Florence with a broken heart was now a man who had brought peace to his people. But even as he smiled at the celebration, Ezio kept his hand near the hidden blade at his wrist. He knew that the life of an assassin was never truly at rest. He looked at the stars, thinking about the message from Minerva and the disaster she had warned about. He knew that his journey was not yet finished, and that the greatest challenge of his life might still be ahead of him. He breathed in the cool night air, feeling the strength in his body and the clarity in his soul. He was ready for whatever the new century would bring. The story of his transition into the role of mentor was a time of growth and reflection. He had moved past the need for revenge and had embraced the responsibility of leadership. He was a guardian of the truth and a protector of the light. As the bells of the town church rang out to mark the midnight hour, Ezio pulled his hood low and looked toward the south. The final chapter of his struggle with the Borgia was about to begin, and he would face it not as a lone warrior, but as the head of a brotherhood that would change the world forever. The journey that began in the year 1476 in the city of Florence finally reached a point of deep reflection. To look back at the life of Ezio Auditore is to see the story of a man who was forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the wisdom of the ages. It started with a young man who cared only for the beauty of the city, the thrill of a rooftop race, and the warmth of his family home. The air of Florence had been sweet and full of promise, but it turned bitter on the day the gallows were raised in the public square. That moment of loss did not break Ezio. Instead, it revealed the path he was always meant to walk. From the quiet training grounds of Monterigny to the winding, water-filled streets of Venice, the story of this era was one of constant growth. Ezio did not just learn how to use a blade or climb a wall. He learned the value of people. He saw that the struggle against the Templars was not a war of two armies, but a choice between control and freedom. In Venice, he learned that even the smallest group of people, like the thieves and the women of the streets, could bring down a corrupt empire if they worked together. The salt spray of the lagoon and the golden light of the Venetian sun became the backdrop for his transformation into a true leader. The middle years of the journey were defined by the search for the apple of Eden and the battle for the soul of the people. The conflict in Forli and the dark days of the bonfire of the Vanities in Florence showed Ezio that power is a dangerous thing, even in the hands of those who think they are doing good. He saw how the monk Savonarola used a holy artifact to strip the people of their joy and their art. By standing on that stage in the square and ending the monk's life, Ezio proved that he was no longer a man seeking personal revenge. He was a guardian who believed that humanity must be allowed to make its own mistakes to truly be free. The final climb to the Vatican and the entrance into the secret vault brought the story to a level that Ezio could never have imagined as a boy. He went from hunting the men who killed his father to receiving a message from a civilization that lived before the dawn of time. He stood in a room of golden light and heard the voice of Minerva, realizing that his life was a single thread in a tapestry that stretched across thousands of years. He understood that he was a messenger for a future he would never see, a bridge between the ancient world and the one yet to come. This realization brought him a peace that no amount of revenge ever could. The legacy of the Auditor family was rebuilt through stone and spirit. Ezio took a crumbling villa and turned it into the heart of a global brotherhood. He took a broken name and made it a symbol of hope for the oppressed. His sister, Claudia, and his mother found strength in the very shadows that had once tried to destroy them. The brotherhood expanded beyond the borders of Italy, creating a network of men and women who watched over the world from the darkness to serve the light. The white hood and the hidden blade became marks of justice that the Templars would fear for centuries to come. As the sun sets on this chapter of history, the air over Italy feels different than it did when the story began. The Renaissance is in full bloom, and the spirit of discovery is everywhere. Ezio's journey through the cities of Florence, Venice, Forli, and Rome helped protect this era of light from those who wanted to return it to the dark. He proved that one man, driven by the right principles, can change the fate of the world. He laid down his weapons, not because the war was over, but because he had fulfilled his purpose and prepared the way for those who would follow. The story of this time is a reminder that nothing is true and everything is permitted. This does not mean there are no rules, but rather that we are the masters of our own actions and must live with the consequences of our choices. Ezio lived by this creed, moving through the world with a steady hand and a clear mind. He turned a tragedy into a legacy, and a hunt for revenge into a search for truth. The red tiles of Florence and the gray stones of Rome will always hold the memory of the man in the white hood who walked their streets and changed the world.